Hello. We're back. And today we're going to go through a lesson on food chains and the circle of life. And the way this fits in is this way. In the last lesson, I really wanted you to get a foundation for where food comes from. So we start at plants and animals. All food comes from plants and animals. And all plants and animals come from nature. So, what I wanted to do is give you a little bit of an idea of how those plants and animals function in nature, how they occur in nature, how they all work together in nature, where they start from. Like I told you, we're going to go way back to the beginning of where food comes from and what food really is and what it isn't. So, we're back in nature. Plants and animals come from nature, and we're going to talk a little bit about food chains and the circle of life here. Now, this is a really, really big topic, and we're just going to touch on it here. I have a huge lesson on sizzlekids.com that's linked here on this lesson. You can go there and you can learn in depth about all the different aspects of food chains and the circle of life and how everything works together. Also, there I have two really awesome videos, one for younger kids and one for older kids about food chains. I have some great books on various food chains. There's all different kinds of food chains in nature. And I also have a game there that I love. It's a board game all about food chains. And you can imagine how fun that is. What eats what and when and who and how much energy they all get from eating the plant or animal above them in the food chain. And there's just a lot of really good information on the website. So here, I just want to take a few minutes and go over food chains a little bit. Since we know that food comes from plants and animals in nature, this is where it actually starts, way back before people, before we're eating animals, before anything. So here in this slide, you see that everything up here in the top left-hand corner, you see that everything starts with the sun. So food chains is like a big game of tag, right? It's tag with energy. So that energy has to originate somewhere. And the place that it originates is from the sun. The sun starts everything. This is why we need sun to grow plants. The plants get their energy from the sun, and with the sun's help, they make some substances inside of them that is their food. The sun creates chlorophyll, which feeds the plants. We have another lesson coming up in a little while of all about photosynthesis. And that's that process that I just explained, where the sun transfers its energy into the plants so the plants can make their own food. And that's where it all starts. Okay, after that, you go into animals who eat the plants. And then the energy is transferred from the plants into the animals. And then you go on from there to certain animals eating other animals. And there's all different kinds of food chains. We have carnivores, which are meat eaters. We have omnivores, which are both plant and meat eaters, and we have herbivores, which are just plant eaters. So here, what you see with the zebras are herbivores, so they just eat plants. So you start with the sun. The plants get their energy from the sun. The herbivores eat the plants to get the energy from the plants, and then the carnivores eat the omnivores and other carnivores. They eat anything to to transfer the energy from the organism or the animal that's above it in the food chain. And then you get to the very top of the food chain, and you would think that would be a lion or a tiger or one of the predators out there, but really it's humans, because humans eat everything. But we'll get into that. What I want you to learn here in this lesson is that everything starts with the sun. You'll see here in this little flow chart that everything starts with the sun. That's where food originates. The energy from the sun goes into the plants, and the sun makes the plants grow. Then the animals eat the plants, getting the energy from the plants, and then some animals eat other animals, transferring that energy into themselves. And then ultimately, we eat the plants and the animals. We'll get into what all the different types of eaters are, the omnivores, the carnivores, the herbivores later. But for right now, I want you to really keep in mind this flow chart that everything starts with the sun. It's chained up to the plants. that's chained up to the plant-eating animals, and then that they're chained up to the meat-eating animals. And so these pictures here, this is a whole array of different kinds of food chains that exist simultaneously in nature. That's called a food web. That's a little bit too complex for what we're going to learn right here. I want you just to understand this as a basic concept so you know where your food comes from. Back to plants and animals, back to nature. The food chain is how it works in nature and how nature feeds itself. You'll see here in these pictures, you'll see a shark that's eating a seal. So that's a predator that's eating another carnivore. You'll see a spider eating some insects and a ladybug. That's another separate food chain. You'll see the lion eating some kind of meat there, and that's another food chain. And you'll see here with the bird and the rabbit, you'll see this bird of prey that's about to eat the rabbit that just ate the plants that got their food from the sun. So that's the basic idea behind food chains. It's really interesting, really complex. I really urge you to go to my website at sizzlekids.com/ the food chain and the circle of life, and you'll find all this information. You can go over it at your own speed. This is just a little bit of an introductory to it. I wanted to show you a couple special food chains here so you kind of get an idea. At the top, we have the corn, which grows from the energy from the sun. And then you have the mouse who eats the corn. And then you have the owl who eats the mouse, and so on and so on and so on and so on. At the same time, you may have some carrots, which grew from the energy from the sun. Then the rabbit eats the carrots, and then the fox eats the rabbit, and then the lion eats the fox. That's another food chain that can go on simultaneously with the one above it. And the bottom one is yet another type of food chain. You have the grass, which got its energy from the sun, always back to the sun. And then you have the grasshopper who eats the grass. And then you have the frog that eats the grasshopper. And you have the snake that eats the frog. And then you have the hawk that eats the snake, and so on and so on. So food chains are really interesting. They're really fun to learn about. Um, you put all these different kinds of food chains together and you have what's called the food web. Very interesting. This is how nature feeds itself. This is where natural food comes from. I wanted to show you a couple special food chains in the ocean. Here's an example of an ocean food chain. Let's start the other way this time. At the very bottom of this picture, you'll see the predator, right? The predator eats the smaller fish, which survived on the fish larvae or the eggs of the fish. They survived on the zooplankton, which is kind of like really tiny organisms in the ocean. And they survived on the plankton, which is like algae that you see on top of the ocean sometimes. So this is a more complex and different kind of food chain in the ocean. All different kinds of food chains everywhere in nature. So interesting. You could study this all day long and never get tired of it. Here we have a desert food chain. So at the bottom, we have some desert grasses that got their energy to grow from the sun, always back to the sun. We have a big sun up here in the corner to remind you of that. And then the desert rat, ate the grass. That's what they survived on. So the energy from the grass goes into the rat to keep the rat alive. And then the snake eats the rat. And the energy from the grass and the rat goes into the snake to keep the snake alive. And then the eagle swoops down and eats the snake. And the eagle gets the energy from the snake and the rat and the grass. And that's what a food chain is. The very bottom one here, we have a rainforest food chain. Also very interesting. Same type of idea. You're going to go from the plant up to the predator in all food chains. Here you have some flowers whose nectar is drank and petals are nibbled by the butterfly. And then the bird, in this picture, it's a toucan bird, eats the butterfly. And then the leopard or cheetah eats the bird. So you get the idea. Food chains are really simple, but they can become very complex with all the hundreds of thousands of organisms and species and plants and animals that we have in nature. And it's designed just perfectly so that everyone gets a meal, everyone gets to eat. Um, with the circle of life, that's a secondary topic that I want you to kind of just touch on here. With the circle of life, all of nature works so perfectly together that these food chains are made up of these four different kinds of types of animals and organisms in nature. So, first, we have the producers, and they use the sun to make their own food. They produce their own food. That's where we get their names. They produce their own food. And then going around clockwise, we have the consumers. The consumers eat the plants. And that's how they get their energy, is by eating the plants. You'll see an elephant there. You might think that an elephant is so big that it has to eat meat to survive, but it doesn't. It survives purely on plants. Same with turtles, same with rabbits, all kinds of different things are herbivores, eating only plants. On the other side, you'll see the predators. The predators also will eat the plants. More than plants, though, they like to eat meat. They like to eat the consumers, the herbivore consumers. And then at the very bottom is a new concept that I want you to just start to learn about, is when the bodies of the animals, the consumers and the predators, when they die, they decompose and they go back into the soil, and they break down and they fertilize the soil for the producers, the plants to grow in. And then the circle starts all over again. So it's really a beautiful cycle in nature. Nature takes care of itself perfectly. We need to be aware of nature and take care of it as well. These systems are so complex and so interesting, and they work perfectly together. But as you can imagine, if we interrupt them, and then there can be damage done to these beautiful systems that work to feed themselves in nature and that ultimately feed us as well. So when we're thinking about our own food, we want to really look back and see where our food comes from in nature, how perfectly nature works together, and how we can help nature stay natural and stay healthy, so that all the organisms of the world and all the animals of the world can live together in harmony. And everyone can be fed, including the plants, the animals, the centipedes, the tigers, the lions, and the people. All right, so this is just a little bit of touching just a little bit on those subjects. Again, on the website, there's a ton more information about all these things. I made this for you to try to remember that at the very top of the food chain and the circle of life is the producer. And it's a producer because it produces its own food from the sun. Next, you have your consumers and your predators, and those are both various levels of eaters. And then at the very bottom, when the consumers and the predators die and decompose, the soil is fertilized by their bodies, and you get things like mushrooms and other organisms that help to break down their bodies and fertilize the soil and then grow new plants. And so it's a big circle of life. So these food chains, so interesting. And the circle of life is also so perfect that I want you just to get a little bit of an idea of that, because that really is where your food comes from. And when you know where your food comes from, you can start to think about what kind of foods you're going to eat and how you're going to protect your environment so that you can have natural, healthy food, just like the rest of nature does. All right. So next we're going to be going into, we're going to be going into more about carnivores, omnivores, and herbivores, the different animals in nature, and including humans, and the different types of eaters, whether they eat meat, plants, or both. All right, so I hope this gave you a little bit of an idea about food chains, where food actually comes from. It really comes from the energy from the sun, and then transferring energy from the sun through various food chains throughout all of nature. They all work perfectly together, and they end up with you. You're the final top dog in the whole system. So we'll see you in the next lesson. And if there's any questions, like I said, go to the website. There's so much awesome information there, and this is one of my favorite topics. So I really want you kids to understand these topics. All right, we'll see you next time.